So it's a new year. It's 2024, a new year. And I think now might be a good time to remind everyone that we in America do not have a free market in healthcare. We do not have a free market in healthcare, health insurance, or pharmaceuticals.
Right now, when we have this no holds barred, Wild West hyper capitalism.
Blow it out your ass.
As many people may try to lead you to believe. And the reason why I bring this up is because lately, as I predicted early last year, the Biden administration and their cheerleaders in the media and on social media, they're spiking the football over all of these reports of lower insulin prices. A lot of people are running with this story. A lot of Democrats and their cheerleaders are running with this story as this magnificent accomplishment of the Biden administration. I talked about this last year in a video, how Big Pharma greed lowered insulin prices, where I explain how the Medicaid drug rebate program and the adjustments to it from the American Rescue Plan led to drug companies lowering insulin prices. But in that video, I also mentioned how there might be some undesirable consequences.
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs!
Namely stuff like a stifling of innovation in the drug industry and shortages and higher drug prices. And since then, we've had a variety of different reports, especially over the last month, including this one from Reuters, written by Michael Ehrman and Patrick Wingrove. On December 29th, drug makers set to raise U.S. prices on at least 500 drugs in January. And the article talks about how the expected price hikes come as the pharmaceutical industry gears up for the Biden administration to publish significantly discounted prices for 10 high-cost drugs in September and continues to contend with higher inflation and manufacturing costs. Under President Jibber-Jabbering Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, the government's Medicare health program can negotiate prices directly for some drugs starting in 2026. Also adds that the conflicts in the Middle East are playing a role in the increased drug prices. We also have this article on the Wall Street Journal, which was published on December 29th by Joseph Walker, how lowering the price of a common asthma drug has made it harder to get. To avoid Medicaid penalties, Glaxo and other drug makers lowered prices. For popular asthma drug Flovent HFA, the tactic to replace it with a generic backfired. Earlier this year, parents trying to fill their children's asthma prescriptions at pharmacies around the country got a jolt. The medicine was no longer covered. Soon, it would disappear from the market. Their reason? Pricing. Starting January 1st, drug makers that have raised prices significantly face stiff new penalties that require them to essentially pay Medicaid for patients that use their drugs. This is something I talked about last year. You're going to see a lot of this. You're going to see some drug companies taking a loss on selling their drugs to Medicaid. In June, Glaxo decided on a riskier gambit. This is after they talk about the why insulin makers reduce their prices on their products by more than 70%. In June, Glaxo decided on a riskier gambit for its popular asthma inhaler Flovent HFA. It told the FDA it would pull the branded drug from the market in 2024. Keep in mind, and I've talked about this before in other videos, namely my video, how the FDA saved Americans from affordable medicine.
Oh, you absolutely suck!
How about 20 to 25 years ago, the FDA banned, they were called CFC inhalers because of the damage they were doing on the ozone layer, even though all of the inhalers combined were doing way less than 1% of the damage to the ozone layer. Either way, the FDA decided that they needed to be off the market, and one of the consequences was higher prices for asthma inhalers. The company hoped patients would use a new generic version manufactured by Glaxo with a lower list price that is not subject to the Medicaid penalties. The maneuver would have effectively cut the price of the medicine by a third. It backfired. Major pharmacy benefit managers are refusing to cover the new generic product despite a list price 35% cheaper than brand name Flovent HFA, a favorite of pediatricians who said it is easier for children to use than other products. The skirmish between Glaxo and PBMs has left children stuck in the middle. One option is to carry a different product, but not all insurers cover inhalers appropriate for children, doctors said. Doctors said the steroid inside the Flovent HFA is not necessarily superior to products with different steroids, but that its inhaler devices is easier to use than others that require greater lung capacity than children can muster. Article goes on to say the fallout from Flovent HFA being pulled off the market is another indication of how hard it can be to lower drug prices and the unintended consequences of, get this guys, government policies designed to promote lower costs.
You absolutely suck!
Again, a lot of people out there will lead you to believe that America has this unfettered, unregulated capitalist system in healthcare. Drug makers have nearly unbridled pricing power for products with patent protection, but to get insurers to cover their drugs, companies often have to concede discounts to the PBMs that manage drug benefits via rebates, creating a gulf between list prices and net revenue. And I went into great detail on this phenomenon in another video I did back in 2022 about how it was titled How the Government Saved Americans from Affordable Insulin. I talk about the role of the FDA and the Medicaid drug rebate program and the Affordable Care Act, and how all of those programs and regulations have led to distorted prices in the drug industry. PBM said that they returned virtually all the rebates to their clients, such as employers, unions, and insurers. But politicians and health policy researchers said the rebates boost profits for insurers and pharmacy benefit managers and undermine their incentive to keep down drug prices. When the gross profit per claim falls relative to other options, you can bet PBMs are going to prefer the other options, said Richard Evans of SSR LLC, an investment research firm. Under increasing scrutiny from legislators, some drug makers have offered cheaper, non-branded versions of drugs whose list prices have risen significantly to account for higher rebates. But many PBMs continue to cover the higher price branded versions of the same drug because they prefer higher rebates and fees, drug makers contend. PBM said they aim to achieve the lowest net price for their clients, often through rebates. Starting January 1st, drug makers will have to pay additional rebates to Medicaid for drugs that have had cumulative price increases since their launch greater than overall inflation. Right now, Medicaid gets these drugs for free. Under the new rules, companies such as Glaxo will have to effectively pay the government for sales to Medicaid because the price increases in some cases add up to more than the initial list price. We also have this article from the Wall Street Journal put up on December 17th of 2023, Biden's drug price boomerang, which says privately insured patients will likely pay much more for drugs owing to the rebates. Democrats tactically conceded this when they drafted the law. They initially planned to apply the Inflation Reduction Act inflation rebates to private insurance market too. That's because employers worried that drug makers would offset the cost of the Medicare rebates by raising prices for their workers. This is what has happened in Medicare with hospital and physician fees. Because Medicare typically pays less than the cost of care, providers charge privately insured patients more to compensate. Private health plans paid hospitals 224% of Medicare rates in 2020, according to a Rand Corporation study. Between 2013 and 2018, prices paid to providers increased at double the rate for commercial insurers as Medicare fee-for-service. Medicaid's mandatory rebates, 23% for brand drugs and 13% for generics off the average manufacturer price, save Medicaid tens of billions of dollars each year. But drug makers have raised prices that privately insured and Medicare patients pay to offset those Medicaid rebates, especially for drugs used mostly for low-income patients. Medicaid rebates have also reduced the already slim margins for making generic drugs, contributing to, get this folks, the current shortages. And then we also have this article on Axios by Caitlin Owens on January 5th. Low prices are contributing to America's drug shortage problem, where it talks about how shortages of life-saving cancer drugs, children's Tylenol, and ADHD drugs have made headlines over the last year. It talks about how the United States relies on countries like India and China for pharmaceutical products, and how this has sparked discussion about how to shore up the drug supply chain, particularly amid tensions with China. President Biden in November outlined a plan to increase domestic production of essential pharmaceuticals through the Defense Production Act. Former President Trump has vowed to bring back production of all essential medicines to the United States if reelected, and he issued an executive order aimed at boosting U.S. drug production during his final year in office. And the article also talks about how bringing medicine production, drug production to the United States, it's going to be costly. Domestic production of more drugs is a popular solution, but experts say it's likely not a panacea, and is less burdensome options may be more practical. The price point to get a product to the American public made 100% in America is going to be a higher price point than whether it's made in Europe, India, and China, said the head of a generics lobby. If you want us to make in America, great. You're going to have to find a way to increase the price to do that. And this part really got me, this whole discussion about shoring up supply chains of drugs in America. It's not just about labor costs and other manufacturing costs and the fact that those are often cheaper abroad. Making the chemicals that go into drugs is an environmentally dirty process that would run into problems with U.S. environmental law, experts said. So it looks like other regulations in the economy may be impacting America's ability to produce these drugs domestically. And we see this already in areas like infrastructure projects and so-called green energy projects that are meant to wean Americans off of fossil fuel consumption in an effort to save the world from climate change, which I've talked about in great detail in other videos, to the chagrin of even people like Gavin Newsom. Joe Grogan, who led Trump's Domestic Policy Council, argued that American consumers may be willing to pay more for a pharmaceutical supply based more at home. So I would be careful if I were Biden and the Democrats. Economy hot potato is a very dangerous game to play. I'd be careful about spiking the football on all these reports of drug prices coming down. Because it looks like in other areas, drug prices are going up, and we might get shortages in the pharmaceutical industry. And it will be interesting to see what happens, and if there are significant undesirable consequences like higher prices for other drugs or drug shortages, it will be interesting to see what Congress and the president will do about it. Going back to the Axios article, I could totally imagine a scenario where Democrats and Republicans get together in the name of bipartisanship and then lobby, maybe pass laws to increase domestic production of pharmaceuticals here in the United States, perhaps subsidizing big pharma, which I imagine will create a total shitstorm in the political commentary world. At the very least, according to the Axios piece, bringing supply chains to America, boosting pharmaceutical manufacturing in America will likely lead to higher drug prices, which everyone across the so-called political aisle seems to want to avoid. The good news is that it looks like that the FDA will begin allowing imported drugs from Canada, although according to this piece from Politico, American consumers might not enjoy the benefits of this right away, partly because the Canadian government, with their beloved socialist healthcare system, might try to put restrictions on exports as a means of not depleting their supply of drugs. And it looks like many players in the pharmaceutical industry are trying to find ways around the current convoluted drug pricing system. Following billionaire Mark Cuban's lead, he got into the pharmaceutical business a few years ago with an online distributor. This article from CNBC reports how Eli Lilly is experimenting with direct-to-consumer approaches. And it also talks about how the industry is starting to follow Mark Cuban in this area, saying drug makers that adopt a direct-to-consumer approach could add even more pressure to the nation's traditional drug supply chain after other companies move to simplify the system in recent months. That includes CVS Health, which announced plans to overhaul its business model for pricing prescription drugs in December, adopting a model similar to billionaire Mark Cuban's direct-to-consumer pharmacy Cost Plus Drugs. Healthcare giant Cigna also announced in November that its PBM will offer a pricing model similar to Cuban's venture. Cost Plus Drugs aims to drive down the price of medicines broadly by selling them at a set 15% markup over their cost plus pharmacy fees. That company is already shaking up the broader healthcare industry. CVS suffered a blow over the summer when a major California health insurer, Blue Shield of California, announced it will no longer use the company as its PBM and instead will partner with several other businesses, including Cuban's firm and Amazon Pharmacy. So it will be interesting to see what the market does with medicine. Hopefully the industry can figure out ways to produce, innovate, and drive prices down in spite of all of this insanity, because this is the current state of the American healthcare system and the pharmaceutical industry, with all of its price distortions due to Medicare and the Medicaid drug rebate program and the FDA and the Affordable Care Act and the Inflation Reduction Act and the American Rescue Plan. Keep all this in mind when all of these messes get blamed on corporate greed and unfettered, unregulated capitalism.